Hi, and welcome to Positive Parenting. My name is Irene Atia. I'm a Christian counsellor, and today we're going to talk about how to prevent behavioural problems in our children. And one of the first things we're going to talk about is how to plan ahead for those high-risk times. Those times where I know that it's difficult for my child to behave in ways that I expect of him. Planning ahead is an important tool for parents. It allows us to know what to expect. And when we know what's coming, we can usually emotionally, mentally, and even physically prepare for it. For example, if I know that going to the doctors is going to mean a long wait and my children are going to be restless and frustrated and possibly annoying other patients, then I'm going to plan ahead for it. I'm going to make sure that I have things in place to entertain them and to occupy them in those times where I know it's going to be hard for them to remain settled. So, in regards to planning ahead, the main idea is very simple. I need to prepare in advance for things that I know are going to be problematic for my kids. And that may be doing things as simple as packing a bag with books that I know that they're going to enjoy reading, or taking colouring in pencils, or packing a snack or a lunchtime treat for times that I know are going to be extended. And I need to decide on rules before I leave. Just like we have ground rules and we have house rules at home that we agree on as a family, it's really important that I tell my child before we're about to enter into an activity my expectation of the child once we get there. A lot of times children misbehave because they don't know what's expected from them. So if I tell my child prior to going somewhere that these are my expectations and these are the rules that I'm going to decide on, then they know what's expected from them. And I also need to tell them the consequences of those rules. But let me give you an example of some simple rules we can use when it comes to planning ahead and making sure that my children know. So for example, if I'm taking two young children on a shopping trip and we're going to go to a particular shop and leave, I'm going to tell them before I get out of the car, or maybe even before I get into the car, these are our 2 or 3 rules in the shopping centre when we go. We're going to hold hands, we're not going to buy anything other than A, B, and C, and at the end of the trip, we're going to get a treat before we get in the car and go home. I've made my expectations clear, and I've also made it clear that this treat at the end of this trip is related to their behaviour. Part of setting ground rules is setting consequences for those ground rules, is making sure that they understand that if they don't obey by the rules that I've set up for this particular event, then there are going to be consequences. There's going to be an opportunity for me to teach and to discipline them. And they need to know what those consequences are going to be. But before the consequences, it's sometimes good to choose an appropriate reward for a behaviour that I'm expecting from them, especially if it's something that I know that they're going to struggle with. For example, if I know that going to a particular family member's place is difficult for them because there are a lot of tempting things for them to touch and possibly break, and the expectation is that they remain in a particular place for a particular period of time, then a good reward for that might be a trip to the playground on our way home. It's important that they know that their efforts to behave in appropriate ways are recognised and rewarded. It's also important that those rewards are not materialistic rewards, that I'm not going to give them a materialistic object every time they behave in appropriate ways. Sometimes all they need is praise, affirmation, and recognition of their positive behaviours, and then they're empowered to do better and to continue to behave in that way the next time. But I want to talk to you about consequences, and those consequences that I need to agree with my child on before we go out on those trips. Where there is a situation where I've set up the ground rules for a particular trip or a particular event, and the ground rules haven't been stuck to, there need to be consequences. I need to firstly have a follow-up discussion about the event that took place and talk about what went well and what didn't go well. But my consequences also need to take place there and then at the very time that the event takes place. And they should relate to the misbehaviour. Children are more likely to learn if the consequence for something that they've done wrong is directly related to the behaviour problem. So, for example, if my child is in a waiting room of a doctor's surgery and they throw their crayons across the floor, the reasonable consequence would be those crayons would get put away because it's related to the misbehaviour. Consequences should also give incentive for good behaviour. I should also be reasonable in my consequences and know that I need to give those crayons back. I need to allow the child the opportunity to do better next time. And they should be appropriate to the child's age and developmental level. A consequence for a 5-year-old of not watching TV for 2 weeks is probably unreasonable and not appropriate to that age. So it's important that I consider my child's abilities, their age, and what they are capable of doing and not doing before setting a consequence. And they shouldn't affect a child's self-esteem. They shouldn't be things that are going to tear them down or make them feel bad about who they are. I'm going to talk to them about the actual behavior rather than them as a person. I'm not going to say, you are stupid, but I'm going to say, I don't like this particular behavior that you've done. It doesn't comply with the rules that we agreed on in the planning that we did prior to getting here. How do you think we can fix it? I'm going to empower them and allow them opportunities to repair the behavior. And they should also be enforceable. I'm not going to threaten to not go on a family holiday when I know that that's going to take place. One, it's not related to the situation, and two, it's probably not something I'm going to enforce. And consequences ideally should happen there and then. They need to know that I'm aware of their behavior and I'm going to deal with it at that moment. Most importantly, consequences need to be consistent. I can't treat one of my children one way and another a different way. Or I can't let them get away with a particular misbehavior today and then harshly punish them for it tomorrow. That leads to confusion, anger, and frustration in children. So it's important that children know that I'm prepared, that I've planned ahead, that what is expected from me today is the same as what's expected from me tomorrow and the next day. That way they feel safe and secure, and they're much more likely to exhibit those positive behaviors that we want them to. Thank you for joining me today. I look forward to seeing you next time on our next episode of Positive Parenting.